Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here today. I'm Scott Casper. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences and Professor of History at UMBC, and I am delighted to welcome you this afternoon to the annual Lipitz Lecture, which is sponsored this year jointly by the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, the Drescher Center for the Humanities, and the Department of Visual Arts. The Lipitz Professorship in the Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences is our college's foremost faculty honor. A number of years ago, Roger C. Lipitz and the Lipitz Family Foundation established an endowed fund at UMBC. I'll pause here. There are seats in various rows. Come on up and find a seat. The Lipitz Endowed Fund has a stated purpose, and I quote, to provide funds to recognize and support innovative and distinguished teaching and/or research in the arts, humanities, and social sciences at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. The Lipitz Professorship is conferred annually for a term of 1 academic year upon a tenured faculty member in our college. Its recipients have typically epitomized UMBC's values of excellence and distinction in research and teaching, as well as outstanding citizenship within and beyond the university. And previous Lipitz professors have included Professors Carlo Di Clemente of psychology, John Sturgeon of visual arts, Tom Field of modern languages, linguistics, and intercultural communication, Jim Grubb of history, Leslie Morgan of sociology, anthropology, and health administration and policy, Raphael Falco of English, Linda Dussman of music, Devin Haggerty from political science, Sherry Waldstein, psychology, Ann Rubin from history, and Carol McCann from gender, women's, and sexuality studies. This year, the Lipitz Professor in the Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences has been Professor Dan Bailey of the Department of Visual Arts, who will be speaking here today. Dan's career as an artist and a leader in the field of visualization is extraordinary. Even before he came to UMBC in 1987, he had already spent many years as an educator, filmmaker, and photographer. His record of grants and awards for his own creative work runs more than a page. Most recently, a commission and 2-month residency in Tasmania, and a residency, commission, and installation at the North Carolina Museum of Art and the Penland School of Crafts. Dan's research spans and connects the areas of animation, interactive media, and time-based media. His films and animations have been included in the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Georges Pompidou Center in Paris, and his work has been screened from the Kennedy Center to the Whitney Museum and many, many, many more venues. As the visionary director of the Imaging Research Center from 1999 to 2016, which is how I first got to know Dan, he built the IRC into a nationally known center for visualization projects across the disciplines, ranging from visual arts, the tour of the Cohn Sisters apartment in Baltimore City, to a series of projects for NASA Goddard on satellite visualization. By my rough count, the IRC's projects under Dan Bailey's direction generated more than $3 million in direct costs, including the 5-year $1 million award from the Robert W. Deutsch Foundation. And I think many of us in this room know Dan best as the facilitator of our own work. As he often said about the IRC, the most important space at the IRC is not all of the wonderful visualization equipment, it's the conference table where people get together to share ideas, to brainstorm about how to make a project better. And I would dare say that no project that ever came into the IRC as an idea left the IRC without being much, much better than the idea that originally started. And that's thanks both to Dan's ingenuity and brilliance and to the climate that he created in the IRC of collaboration, of ideas spinning and colliding and ultimately becoming better than they ever could have been from one person's mind. When I got to UMBC 6 years ago, one of the most fun parts of my job was just sitting in my office with Dan and brainstorming about something that he was working on or something that I was working on or some combination of those things. So all of us, I think, are grateful for Dan Bailey's collaboration, for his colleagueship, and for so much more over our time here, whether it is faculty colleagues or his students, who have been many, from the Intermediate and Digital Arts MFA program to computer science and information systems. They know him as a devoted, smart mentor whose ideas make their work stronger and better as well. When Praminda Jacob, who was then the chair of visual arts, nominated Dan last year for the Lipitz professorship, she wrote, "For most of his career at UMBC, Dan has continued to brainstorm the best pedagogical approaches for animation by developing state-of-the-art curricula in this rapidly evolving, burgeoning field." Dan's Lipitz project for the past year has been to continue to develop and refine his project, Visualizing Early Baltimore, an extraordinary 3D digital mapping of all of Baltimore in the year 1815, an amazing, powerful resource for scholars and educators, and a model for kindred projects by others. His talk for today, Seeing the Unseen Landscape, draws from that work. And so it is my pleasure to welcome Dan Bailey to the podium as the 2018-2019 Lipitz Professor in the Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences.
Wow. Problem with introductions like that is, can the talk live up to the expectations? No, I've had a great year, and it was a great opportunity. I want to thank Scott, thank the college, definitely want to thank Praminda for obviously writing an amazing, persuasive nomination letter, and obviously thank the Lipitz group as well. I'm actually going to talk about two projects, and I am really interested in research, and it was great to hear Scott sort of talk about or understand that I am really interested in colleagues and collaboration, because I think I will mention, maybe even by name, depending on how chatty I feel as I go through this, some colleagues here at campus that say these little comments about your work and about your research that nudge you in a direction or help you along the way. So it's not all about me, it's about all of us, as always, when I talk. The other thing I want to mention is that this first project, Slow Exposure, is very nascent, and I think it's important to talk about that kind of research, and I think UMBC does a really good job at that. I have never talked about it, haven't shown the work to anybody, so I'm more interested to see how it feels to me to sort of put this out here. I'm looking forward to any feedback that you have. You all know my email address. Send me all the tips and tricks and who I should read and look at as we go through this. Whereas Visualizing Baltimore is obviously very mature. It's a 7-year project. I mean, we have the 30-second elevator pitch, the 20-second, 2-minute elevator pitch. We've got the power lunch pitch. We got the tours. We got the prototype. We got the grants. We got the text. We got the budgets. We got the people who want to publish it. We got the people who want to support it. I mean, it's the other extreme. And so I'm sort of enjoying bringing up both of these at once, because they really are the spectrum of research. And it's so important that we focus, we being UMBC, students, faculty, everybody, looking at that broad range of research. Usually the nascent stuff is a little more difficult because it's more difficult to write a proposal on it. And I think it's really, research means failure. You know, if you're not failing, you're not doing research. You've all heard that. And, you know, hopefully the failures are small and they're iterative and you get through them really quick. But this is a kudos to the Lipitz and how this grant is administered, and I just want to thank you, and so I've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to tear right into this really quick. These two projects are very different, but they relate, but they also are based on some previous work of mine, and it was actually interesting to sort of pull this out. Scott mentioned it in the intro. I did do I was commissioned by the North Carolina Museum of Art and Penland School of Craft to do two pieces, a double piece called Looking Up and Looking Down. Looking up is a temporal mapping of the sky in western North Carolina. It's very active. And looking down is a temporal mapping of human activity on a campus, and where people move and where they walk. The looking up part is very difficult to talk about. It's very slow. This is actually fast. This is a looking up piece. I recorded the sky for over a year, had 20 hours of video that were randomly played in public spaces. So it wasn't something you sat down and watched. It was more like a painting or a window, and you just lived with it. And it is not shock and awe and narrative. It's something to live with, and that doesn't do well in a PowerPoint. Looking down is aerial mapping with a helium balloon, lots of helium balloons over a period of a year on 2 campuses with a tethered camera, and I would walk around with it all day long for 9 months and shoot. The camera would shoot automatically. In both campuses, I shot about 2,000 pictures. I threw this one in because you might know the sculptor who did that piece. He's right outside the door of our building here. This piece was there in 1999. So the looking down piece, and I'm going to come back to it when we get to Baltimore too, because I think it's really interesting. This is about 3,000 printed out pictures collaged together, and it's mapping where people walk. So it's really following the paths. If you've never been to the North Carolina Museum of Art, it's 550 acres and it's mostly a sculpture garden. It's an amazing place to work through. The piece is presented as satellite swaths on a wall, as if a satellite had just gone over. You can see the woman maybe has a magnifying glass so that you are really welcome to get up close to it. And as you get closer and closer, you can begin to see the individual activity of where people are. And as you can see, I'm already playing with different times of day. The shadows are different directions. It's different times of year. This happens to all be summer, obviously. But I want to come back to this because I was just talking to Anne on Monday about this. I think this is a really interesting way to depict people in virtual environments where you don't really want to get to know them. You want to just know that there's activity. There's problems when you start modeling people realistically. There's huge problems with that. And this is a way to just sort of describe them. And I think this kind of energy shows that there's action happening and there's activity, even though it's a still picture. So both these projects are related to this effort that I did a number of years ago. So slow exposure is a working term for me right now. And the reason it's a working term is that there's lots of organizations that use that term. There's URLs. It's overused, in fact. But I really like the term. And slow as in exposure. Slow as in slow foods, which is a reaction to fast foods. The whole approach to how you feed yourself, the same approach that I wanted to take with photography, and it's a reaction to fast food and instant messaging and Instagram and, how many trillion pictures of do we post a day on Snapchat and Instagram, and how many of them are empty calorie in my book. So I like slow in relationship to that. Exposure I like because it has to do with geology, a northern exposure, a windward exposure. It's talking about a different time period. So slow exposure is all about trying to think about doing shutter speeds that are measured in years and decades and centuries. And most people just laugh at me when I say that to them, but I'm serious about it, and I'm trying to work through it, but I've only had 6 months so far. It's hard to do a decade exposure when you only got 6 months. But I'm working through it, and yeah, it's still going. Okay, great. And there's a lot of other artists that are working in this, and I should give a quick nod to them. And I've only picked 3. There's Michael Wiesely from Berlin, Germany. You probably know him the most from his 3-year pictures, photographs of the Museum of Modern Art's addition being built. He's done a lot in Germany. I think this is Potsdamer Platz. But he sets up a camera and he does open the shutter, and the shutter stays open. And sometimes you can see the sun paths moving through it. I don't think you can see that in either. Yeah, there you can see how the sun is moving at an angle over a period of 3 years and burning out the sky there. You can see the different stages of the building. He's got a great quote, and I like to use this quote to talk about this to you. You know, if you want to do a year-long exposure, you need data for 6 months. And if you want to do a 6-month exposure. So I'm in that early data acquisition phase, trying to learn how to obviously simulate these long exposures. One of my favorite is Alexei Taranko. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. City of Shadows, Russian. And these are obviously pictures of people with their hands on the railing moving up, but it's a long shutter speed. More from this series. And it's really evocative and close to sort of the same kind of feelings and emotion and meaning that I want to try to get out of my work, possible work. Chris McCaw from San Francisco. I love this work. This is paper. These are solagraphs, but he uses a pinhole, and that's actually burnt. He's actually burning, so it's a one-of-a-kind picture. You know, it's making a photograph, but while the sun moves, it's actually smoking and burning the paper as it goes, and it creates a really remarkable image, and it's called, the series is called Sunburnt. And then lastly is Jonathan Keats, who's doing the Century Camera Project, and he's actually making cameras that are going to not be touched for 100 years. And they're all glued around different places in Berlin, and I think he's doing one in San Francisco. Only one person knows where each camera is, and that person is supposed to tell their children or somebody younger. And there's already a gallery that thinks it's going to be around in 2114 that's ready to show the work. I love it. It's just great. So my work is a lot different. I'm not working analog. I'm working digitally, and I have good reasons for it. And I build camera stations where there's a tripod on something that's fairly sturdy, and I go back to this camera station over and over and over again, different weather, different times of day, different kinds of film sensitivity or digital sensitivity, and record these in data. And I will say right now, I think what the difference between what I'm interested in doing is the analog approach where you open up the shutter for 3 years. That makes intellectual sense to me. You know, it just feels right. But I actually think it's really biased. It's biased towards the brightest light source. And so you're only going to get daytime information, and we don't mind that because we're daytime people. But you're not going to get nighttime information, and that's half of the world. For example, this particular shot right here, if you did a 1-year exposure of that, the screen on the camera would never show up because it's so dim compared to the sunshine that would obviously be falling on it for a year. And so I'm really interested in trying to get a more equal balance to how things work. So I've got camera stations. I did a 2-month residency in Tasmania, as Scott mentioned. I had 12 camera stations in very precarious places. Windgrove is right on the coast, and all I had to work with, I worked with the ocean, and I only had 2 months. I've now started setting up camera stations in North Carolina and Maryland, and I'm working on seasonal ones that want to go for a year, so I can get deciduous trees going through all the phases. Obviously, I have nothing to show. I just started, you know. So come back in a year. And I'm also working with systems fairly unsuccessfully with how to use public spaces and not build camera stations. So I'm working out GPS and plumb bobs and all this kind of stuff. So the process is I go to a camera station, that's a 15-minute exposure. I try to do 4 of them, so I get an hour-long exposure. Those get blended together, and then that's the recording, and I move on. At the same time, I'm using all sorts of wavelengths, and this is a common practice with astronomers and scientists. A quick little example of, you can see the white around the rocks under UV, that's actually kelp. Whereas kelp is usually dark green and doesn't show up under visible, under UV it just glows. And so if I wanted to, or if a scientist wanted to, they can mix these two together and start pulling out different kinds of information than we can see with our own eyes. And I like this idea of bringing more information to the landscape process than we normally bring. And these are examples. Hubble, you see this all the time. These are, if you flew over there with your iPhone and took a picture of NGC 6303, it's not going to look like that. They are taking all these different exposures and putting them together. So here is one quick example of, they're already sort of halfway combined together, but these are about 100 different exposures of Wedge Island. And they come together and this is a mean, that's the average of all of them blended together. And that's sort of my starting point. And I work a lot like a painter at this point. I love math and science, and that is not a photoshopped image. That's just the, remember high school statistics, mean, median, mode, standard deviation, maximum, all that stuff. Well, you just pick a different one of them and it runs through it. This is minimum. So it goes through all the pictures, picks the darkest pixel, and puts them together. And for some reason, the vegetation was picked and the sky and ocean were picked black and white. So these are sort of my goals. I'm really looking at what is anthropocentric landscape and wanting to change the time frame and wanting to think about physiologically how our eyes work versus what is available out there, and then just sort of the cultural upbringing baggage that we bring to our expectations of what a landscape is. How am I going to synthesize a 100-year? That's a good question. I just started working on this 2 months ago. This is an attempt to start building a forest where a field is, and you're using the horizon line, which will always remain constant, and you're slowly blending all these together. And this is only the winter shot, but hopefully a year from now, when I have 2 or 3 seasons, you'll begin to be able to get a sense of a changing forest. And I'm really interested in forests. I'm interested in that 200-year approximate lifespan of a tree. So this is that moment when, after all this intro, I'm supposed to show you amazing photographs that illustrate all my ideas and techniques and my goals. And you all swoon in your seats with, engagement. But obviously I don't have that. I've got a few. I've been playing around with them. I will be showing some this fall at the faculty show at CADVC, so you could actually see some on print. But these are all in the 2-month range. And I think another thing that I'm discovering about this that I like, I grew up a filmmaker and I always like to edit. And now I'm thinking of photography more like poetry and painting, where you can just go back to the same photograph day after day, month after month, pick it up a year later and rework it and add another layer in, blend it differently, go take another layer and put in on top. So at the end of this, I was going to sort of acknowledge a few colleagues and important things that they've said to me over the years. And I'm just going to do one off the cuff right now. I'm going to spotlight Kathy Odell. About 6 to 8 years ago, I gave a talk on my landscape photography back then, which was panoramas. I was sort of working that in VR. Had this really complicated title. Part of the title was "Wish You Were Here," and it was all about, you know, like you write that on the back of a postcard of a beautiful landscape or Instagram. And, you know, I gave my talk, and Kathy comes up, and she's talking to me, and, you know, giving me, you know, her take on it. And it's all positive, and we're chatting. She says, "But there is a problem." And I go, "Okay." She says, "The title's all wrong. It's not Wish You Were Here. It's Wish You Weren't Here. Your photographs are about being by yourself. Your photographs are about being alone. Your photographs are not about wanting to have other people around." So I've been living with that for 8 years. And, and I'm working on it, Kathy. Thank you. This series is directly, I don't know where I'm going with it, but I'm not hiding from it, that, you know, and Mark Duran had a great comment 2 weeks ago. He said, photography is about remembering. And if photography is about remembering, then I'm hoping that these are memories not of an individual, not of a culture, but memories of a species. I think that would be really, really interesting to work with. So thanks to everybody. Everybody always makes me seem smart, and I like that. Last one. This I got an effect in here that I can't cancel out of, so I'm stalling for time here. Anyway, the Visual Arts has a rotating faculty show, biennial, and it's my slot coming up, and I'm looking forward to printing these up, and you could all come in the fall and maybe see some of these real life. So where's this all going? Good question. Oh, shoot. I'm locked into this. Come on, come on, come on. There we go. Two things I want to do is where I'm going with this. One is the mundane landscape. You know, I live in Maryland. And, you know, most of the landscape in the world is mundane. It's not the grand landscapes. And so this is one of these shots that I'm shooting. This is from a camera station in Baltimore County. And just really wanting to sort of think about what the everyday is like and what can be brought to it. The other one is really looking at humans' impact on the planet. And I went out to Chaco Canyon this fall thinking that it was going to be a slam dunk, and it wasn't a slam dunk in terms of figuring out how to work this out, but I love this shot. Threatening rock, obviously threatening rock. For the animators in here, see those three little eyes? You'll never see this picture any other way. They're all huddled, they're scared. Here's big threatening rock, and they're, oh! But it's great. So this is the ruin of a civilization, and there's a lot of research about it. They built it knowing that that rock was going to fall, but they went on, and the rock did fall, and it fell in 1941, and it ripped out that wall with those little windows in it. And so there's this, what I'm calling hope, hubris, and grief about humankind's relationship to the natural world. And the time periods that the natural world is talking about are so much different than the time periods. And that's where the shutter comes in and these different layers and sort of working like a painter. So now I'm going to transition, and I'm looking at the clock, I'm doing great, to Baltimore, and I sort of like the fact that thinking about Baltimore, I can use the same title, Hope, Hubris, and Grief. So I think a lot of you in here are familiar with early Baltimore It's 7 years old. It's been shown it's permanently at the Maryland Historical Center. It's been at the Peel Museum. It's permanently at the Imaging Research Center. UMBC has drug it out. It's online. We've talked about it. I've given talks at Curie. I don't want to back up and spend your time rehashing some of this stuff. It is interesting, and I have materials here that if you want to go back and see sort of some of the initial steps that we went through to get this. But we've moved on to a whole second phase, and I sort of want to, focus our talks on that. So this is the image that you see currently. It's just one view. It's a 2.5 billion pixel image. It takes about a month to render out. And it's online, and it's tiled like Google Maps, so you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. And it's interactive, and so you can get the names of the streets. And there was a few hot spots that the Maryland Historical Society did. And it was funded because of the War of 1812 bicentennial. That's how we got the funding for this initially. And there's a permanent kiosk there. But thanks to IRC, people and good thinking, we just used a web browser engine to do all the graphics. So it plays online. It plays anywhere. I can bring it up here if anybody wants to see it. But what's impressive about this is it's a real 3D model. And so you're looking at, actually, this is brand new as of 1 a.m. This just came out of the computer. This is my newest map of Baltimore on the newest terrain, but these are the buildings from 5 years ago. But it's a real 3D model. And you can move it around. Everything is able to be selected and moved and changed. Any angle can be picked. The reason these buildings, I think I start clicking them. Yeah, the reason the buildings are gray right now is that it's so much data, no computer or render could do it all at once. So these are called proxies. I call them monopoly buildings. And when it comes time to render, the computer goes to the buildings and gets them. So we can put any map underneath it. We can put the textures that are in the original scene, all the gorgeous farm fields and grass and trees. But just to sort of show you what's available with this. And since it's a 3D model, we can do satellite shots, sort of matching what Google would do with Google Earth or satellite view. We can do street views, and obviously we can do bird's eye, and we have all the maps. So in terms of being able to tell a story about early Baltimore, we have a pretty good database here. We were commissioned by BGE for their 200th anniversary of the first gas streetlight, which is right there. This is the Holiday Street Theater. It's gone, but there's the Peel Museum. And the gas was generated right over here behind the Peel Museum. And they ran the gas pipe was just a log with a hole through it. And they ran the pipe down the street and over to the first gas light. In the usual talk, I talk about how amazing Baltimore was. It was the fastest growing city in the United States. It was the third largest city in the United States. The British came to bomb Baltimore not because they didn't have anything else to do. I mean, Baltimore was the upcoming place, and the shipbuilding here, making these ships that went out to terrorize the British. I don't know my history that well, but it was a remarkable time with both economically and what was being done here. It was also, all that building and everything was done on the backs of a lot of people. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. Oh, shoot, here we go again. Once I lock into a Zoom, I can't get out of the Zoom. Here we go. So everybody asks me, why am I interested in Baltimore? Why do you want to do this? And a couple of reasons. One, it's before photography, and nobody knows what Baltimore looked like. It's a real challenge. Maps are not good. But I think one of the main reasons is just how much it's grown and growth. And so I love this. I went to Light City with some friends and family a year ago, and we parked at the Museum of Science and Industry. And we went to the Little Havana, y'all know the Little Havana Cafe restaurant over here, walked down past AVAM, you know, and then by now the bicyclists were doing their parade and it was packed and wall-to-wall people in here. And then we finally squeezed by the Science Museum and we saw all the work that's in here. And then we went around here and out on the piers and saw the work. We went around the World Trade Center, went across Pier 6 and past the aquarium and ended up where all the high-rise buildings are. Turned around and walked back. 3 hours. 3 hours. Strolling. Millions of people. That's a 3-hour walk, round trip. So look at how small Baltimore is. This is what fascinates me, is that it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal to move around. It was a walking city. It was a human and horse city at the time. Versus now. There's that same blue line. Okay? This is just 200 years later. And if you think about how I want to do a shutter speed over the life of a tree, this is 200 years. And some poor little oak tree that grew up in Druid Hill and made it for 200 years has actually seen a lot of change. And I think that's sort of part of the interest here. And it is a challenge working on this. The maps are not that accurate. This one is very accurate. This is Poppleton. And for all you IMDA grads, and you go to the Lion Building, what street are you on? It all makes sense. He got a street named after him. So when you walk down Poppleton, you can remember him. The problem with this map is that it's a developmental map. It's not showing you what the city looks like. It shows you what the city is going to look like. So you can't really determine what was there, and this is how they were going to lay out all the streets. This is how they sold property. The other thing about maps at this time period is they didn't know how to show elevation data, the whole idea of contours. This is the Hannah. But I'll show a fun little, I am going to do a few little things from the first talk. If you're not familiar with it, the Washington Monument would be right there in Mount Vernon. The Basilica would be up in here. This is all the Mercy Hospital. Center stage is right about in here. But this is the Jones Falls coming down, and it was a big oxbow. And it's all been filled in. All right, so, and they had already, by the time period we're working in, and they didn't have steam engines or anything. They're using slaves and indentured people and immigrants and mules and shovels. They redirected the Jones Falls River already. This is how fast Baltimore was moving at that time period. But you can see these hash marks here. So this is the only information on this map that, oh, this is a hill. Well, what kind of hill was it and how high was it? So these are the kind of challenges that I like. The paintings at the time are gorgeous, and they do tell stories, but they're also not very accurate at times. This looks like these two people are standing on the edge of a Grand Canyon. This is where Mercy Hospital is. This is the oxbow that they filled in. But these buildings are still here. We know they're 40 feet above sea level. Here's sea level way over here, and here's these buildings. They look like we're in the Shenandoahs. So trying to understand what the city looked like. So I'm gonna start bragging here for a second, because my goal here for part of this is I think there's a good tool here, and I'm hoping I didn't make this tool for it to sit on a server for the next 20 years. I want people to use this tool. So I'm going to brag a little bit, but I'm building on a lot of work previously, so I did want to take a moment and just put everybody's names up there who did a huge amount of work on the first phase or the second phase. Which brings us to the next step, and there was really two goals that the IRC and myself and some other people had. One is we have a great stage to tell stories, but obviously no one's interested in knowing that that's a particular street. They want to learn something. What's the content? You know, it always comes down to content, always comes down to story. So we need to be searching for good content that is compelling, that can utilize the database, also can bring in grant money. The other goal is, and this was from Ann Rubin from History, taking us to conferences and meeting with other people who work in digital history with maps and spatial data. It became clear that there's a group of people that actually want access to the data. And we didn't have it. We used Photoshop and Maya and paper. And so for the last year and a half, I've done a lot of moving everything over into ArcGIS, which is a standard GIS software that anybody who has some training in it can use, but also it's a great receptacle for data. So here comes a quick 3-minute brag. You know, in this database, we have, back up. In this database, I've georeferenced over 100 maps. And that means they're all now in correct contemporary coordinates and they're matched to your cell phones. And this is how we bring up all the information. There's citations now, there's bibliographies. We can vet our work, we can answer questions with our work. We have really good contours that generate the 3D data. And these are all hand-drawn. If you want to know what the process is, once an animator, always an animator, I guess. When you want to know the process of how you draw all these contours. A lot of this was done previous to me at Curie and with some other experts. But then I have drawn hundreds of thousands of contour lines that go from Aberdeen down to Annapolis. And I found bathymetric data. That's how deep the harbor is. So these lines out here are actually how deep the harbor is. So we have a very accurate, as accurate as the maps were, topography of Baltimore in the mid-19th century, in the 1850s. I think somebody might want that sometime. So the next step is we got the shorelines figured out, we got the contours figured out, we need to do the streets. And this is the next thing that I worked on. There are street directories from that time period. I did 4 of them, and they're sort of like the yellow pages back in the 1990s, 1980s, 1960s. And what they do is Baltimore Street, you all know Baltimore Street, it runs west from Jones Falls to the lower Frederick Turnpike Road. So if I can figure out where the lower Frederick Turnpike Road is, I now know how far Baltimore Street goes. And I went through, this is 1816, and transcribed it into ArcGIS. And so there's every street according to the directory. And this is giving us a pretty good idea of what they thought, where people were living for tax purposes or mail delivery or whatever. I did this for 4 years and then brought them all together into one map. And this is our sort of circa final 1818 city directory. Every street has got its original name in the database. You can flip it over and have all the contemporary names. It tells what the street was made of, what its classification is, all the kinds of things that a scholar and a researcher would want to do. From that, and using other data, we're able to draw the city blocks, and we're able to figure out their density. So you're beginning to get an idea by the darkest squares being the most populated, you're beginning able to see where people were actually living. And here comes the bane of our existence. This is, and I'll move into a close-up. Oh, actually, this looks pretty good. Addresses. And I got a little bit of time here. So you need to understand that this is Baltimore, this is Old Town, and this is Fells Point, and there were 3 separate towns, and they all had separate addresses, or no addresses. And then over a time period, they sort of came together in the time period that we want to work on. And the center of town kept changing. First, that was the center of town, and then Calvert was the center of town, and then now Charles is the center of town. So all the addresses changed. And people have actually sort of not tried to, they can't. There's just no information. And I'm going to sort of jump the gun, but Anne was bringing in all this data. You'll hear about Anne and the data she's bringing in, but it's all address-based. Well, sort of. Some of it's address-based. But we don't know where 23 Baltimore Street is. And so we started going to all these experts, and nobody says that, no, there's only one place and no one's ever done it, and that is the 1804 Street Directory. So this is Fells Point. I'm going to move into a close-up of Fells Point. And this is a section we're working on sort of as a vertical slice to understand what we're up against. So here's the 1804 directory, and I've just done Fells Point. But here is North Howard Street. It runs north and south. And when you start at Baltimore Street and you go on the east side, from 2 to 22 is on that first block. And then you hit Fayette, and then it's 24 to 46. And then you hit Lexington, and it's 48 on up. And so no one's ever done this. We're dumb enough to do it, or stupid enough. But we have, I did Fells Point. We're entering all those addresses in. So now when we have data with an address from any time between 1800 to 1830 maybe, they changed, but at least it's all we have. It's all we have. So this was a huge undertaking, and we now have somebody working, trying to get all of Baltimore done. Tedious work. Once an animator, always an animator. This is Sanborn, because now I'm trying to place buildings. That's the ultimate goal. Sanborn is much later, but at least the buildings are drawn. There's a lot of tricks to understanding it. For example, Baltimore passed a law in 1800 that you couldn't build a frame house anymore. So if in 1880 you found a frame house in Sanborn, marks yellow any framed house. These are all framed. Wood means that it was built in our time period, and so we know that there was a building there. So there's all this kind of data, but this is what we're getting for. This is what we've been dying for, is an accurate map with streets and addresses and the buildings laid out. Blue, this is Fells Point, so this is easy. Blue is extant, that means they're surviving. It means you can go there and see that building today. Gray is we know something about it. We have a photograph, a floor plan, a written text, and the red hashed means that it's assumed. We know there's a building there, we don't know what it is. So with all that kind of data, we're able to now slowly get in all the buildings, and that is our goal. So that's the end of the brag. And if you know of anybody who's working in this area in research, we're very open source. We think it'd be great if people would add stuff in. So the other area, the content area, Ann Rubin from history came in, has done a lot of projects in the IRC before becoming the associate director of the IRC. I had worked with her. She had worked with other people in visual arts, a lot of digital history, and she saw Baltimore and saw some potential. And this is the most recent content idea that she's using. This is the title. She got a START grant for this last year to help her start researching this. And this is her area. It's not my content area. But she's looking at where enslaved people and where free blacks and where whites were living and trying to, they're ignored people, not the whites, they're ignored people and trying to find stories and connections. And my favorite line from Anne, second favorite, you're going to hear my favorite line later, but my second favorite line from Anne is, we're talking about, she just reads the newspaper want ads from 1818. hour after hour. And I just sort of looked at her and smiled. She says, Dan, all my friends are dead. You know, it's just like, I just live. I know all these people. You know, she finds a want ad. There's a name of a runaway slave. Then she tries to trace the white owner. Then she goes to the tax records. Then she goes to the city directory. And she's trying to build a whole story around this. And it's been wonderful. So this is what we're hoping is some content, some compelling content that is really important to get out there. People are interested in it, and we can use Baltimore as a way to showcase it. So a lot of the information is in wards, and the wards changed all the time. This is my first introduction to gerrymandering. One year the wards are going vertical, and the next year the wards are going horizontal across the city. But a lot of Ann's information is coming in from wards. So this is combining a lot of stuff that we worked on. I'm getting close. We're about 5 minutes from the end. We're getting into the heavy data part now. So we know how this is a scatter dot. Every dot represents one person. And obviously, if you look at the wards, they're much bigger than where I've drawn it. But I've confined them to the city. And what I'm attracted to in this is that if you look at the ratio of how the dots for whites are sort of evenly spread with a concentration in the middle. I don't know this for a fact, but that seems to make logical sense that these boundaries of the city and the wards and the population data are fairly consistent. We don't have a big hole in the center or a really dense part out of town. Here is free blocks. One dot per entry. And you can start seeing possibly, and Ann and I are not, I'm not ready to make conclusions. I'm ready to tell Ann what I'm seeing. Ann will make the conclusions. But perhaps there's fewer free blocks in the center of town. And Fells Point, in this area that we've been working on, there seems to be a higher population of free blocks, but not much. I mean, it's actually pretty diverse across the city. And here's enslaved. And again, not wanting to make conclusions, you need to realize that this is only 6 days old. You're looking at, it's not like we did this and have been writing about it. This is like hot off the press. Ann and I, we got to live with this for a while. So possibly it seems to be that there's more enslaved in the center of town. And you can put them all together. And, you know, there's all these different ways to visualize data, and this is just one way to sort of try to figure out. Ann is really interested in trying to figure out how diverse was the city at that time period, and how did everybody live and what their stories are. Everybody asks us, oh, is this the beginning of the red line map? The famous residential security map of 1935? No, because Baltimore was so small, okay? It's not even impacting at that point. And I think, and Ann can jump up and say that I'm wrong, but I think a conclusion that we're sort of coming up with is that diversity in neighborhoods was pretty evenly, but it was much more on a per street basis. Baltimore is laid out, at least in Fells Point, if you think about it, the north-south streets, every other one is an alley and every one is a wide street. They got rid of the alley names. But there's some streets in there that you can't imagine a car can come down and you're not going to die. It's so narrow. Those are the alleys. And then there's other streets that are real streets, 4 lanes with sidewalks. Those are the streets. And there is some conjecture at this point that that was possibly. So, like good researchers, we've started to plot some of that data. So here's some more data that Ann has come up with. These are newspaper ads for slave trade. There'll be more to come, but this is also just from the last week. And a couple interesting things that we have not made any conclusions on. There's no slave trade in Fells Point. And it makes sense that all the slave trade is on Baltimore, the main street through town. And if you read these ads, and they're really compelling, most slave trades, and this would be want ads to purchase and want ads to sell, is all happening on street corners on Baltimore. And these are advertisements in the want ads for a runaway. Someone has posted a want ad that someone has run away. And these are really interesting descriptions because they can get really detailed as to what the individual was wearing, what the individual took with them, potentially where they might went. So Anne was sort of interested to see that these are really scattered around the whole city. Some of the data is wrong. Oh, that was the other one, never mind. So we want to do continue this vertical slice. Almost done, 3 more slides and then fun. Want to do a vertical slice of one alley, so we picked Strawberry Alley. And again, we just looked at this for sort of the final data for the first time on Monday. Strawberry Alley is no longer called Strawberry Alley. Obviously, it's called Dallas Street, and it's in Fells Point. But what we did was map from her databases everybody that we knew that might possibly live on Strawberry Alley. And we were able to position a few of them. This is the Poppleton map, so we know that nobody's living there. Okay, so we don't going to put a dot up there. We know where the buildings are, and we can begin to start positioning people. And this is one of these slides that drive you nuts, and this is like the third from the end slide almost, because this is what we're dealing with. And I'll walk you through it because I think it's interesting, and actually you can read it. I love this room. This is a great room. So here is Matilda Hogan. She's a laundress. If you ever want to get Anne to really get excited and tell you great stories, ask her what it was like to be a laundress in 1820 in Baltimore. So there's the address. Someplace on Strawberry Alley south of German Street. Here's German Street. Okay, there she is. But she could be down here. All right, but she's someplace on Strawberry Alley. And I also picked David Lomax. We don't know what he did. And I picked him because what a great address. Strawberry Alley's on the west side. So a couple more funny stories later on about this, but there's where he is. So the people that, he's on the west side, but he could be anywhere along here. These 5 free blacks are listed only as the east side of Strawberry Alley, so they could be anywhere. And these are enslaved and whites that could be anywhere on Strawberry Alley. So this is where we get worried about bias. And what kind of determinations. And to be honest, if you look, I mean, just look at, is that Cab? Cato. Strawberry Alley north of Wilk. Okay, where's Wilk? Here's Wilk. So he's probably on the lower half because he was up here, he might be south. But, you know, we're making guesses as to where these people were. And you can begin to see that this is really fuzzy data. This is pretty indiscernible. And where you start placing people can be really difficult if you're trying to make conclusions. So this comes back to an idea that we're thinking of is not so much worried about the house, but we know that everybody was on Strawberry Alley and they had to be walking up and down Strawberry Alley. And they're talking to each other and they're meeting each other, or they're working with each other, or they're working for each other. And this might be a way we want to go with beginning to visualize the data, that you're not clicking on a house. Seems pretty cold, actually. But you're actually beginning to interact with the people that live there. Perfect timing. I want to turn this back to us as a community and get ready for questions and answers. I've been talking for an hour now. And Scott mentioned the word. It's been one of my favorite words. In fact, someone made me a cup with the word colleague on it that I can drink out of. And I've already told one, and that was Kathy Odell, the Wish You Weren't Here. But I want to tell 3 more. And the next one is John Sturgeon, who some of you may know. He's retired now, but he was in visual arts. And he was chair of visual arts, and I was probably director of the IRC, and we were at some meeting, campus level, talking about interdisciplinary and collaboration and art and science connections, you know. And we were walking back from that, and he just says, you know, it's going to be really, it's going to be really hard, because artists embrace ambiguity, scientists try to eliminate it. And I'm not sure if that's his words or not, but it was just great to think about that, and I like that tension. And if you think about both of these projects, you know, there is a sharp edge between ambiguity and hard data. It's qualitative data and quantitative data. You know, it can all be reduced down to everything. But I like that tension, and I sort of enjoy that razor blade edge going back and forth as to when do you need the data, when do you eliminate ambiguity, and when do you try to tell interesting stories and work with ambiguity. Number 2. I should be counting up. I don't have these in order. The next one is Lee Boot. And you know, I worked with Lee Boot for almost 20 years. I'm still working with Lee. And he has an unlimited battery for coming up with amazing insights. And this was probably 15 years ago. And I don't know what we were talking about, but it has stuck with me for 15 years. And it's really helping me with these 2 projects. And he says, and I've butchered this. This is not what he said. These are not quotes. I mean, these are just paraphrases. And he's not saying these formally. But if you want to depict a forest, hire a painter, not a photographer or a scientist. I love this. Because this is what I think he's saying. I don't care what he's saying, but this is what I think. This is what I think he's saying. Well, the genius of it is the word depict. He's not saying define. He's not saying explain. He's saying depict. And as a visual artist, we do a lot of depicting every now and then. But what he's saying to me is that if you ask a photographer or a scientist, they're going to get down in the weeds. They're going to deal with too much data. I'm the photographer. I'm going to talk about lenses and sharpness and chromatic aberration and get every leaf and white balance and gigapixels. And the scientist is going to get into systems and processes and try to describe a forest that way. But what's a painter got? Painter's got 4 or 5 hairs from a horsetail clamped to a stick and some ground up pigment mixed with linseed oil. And is going to take a piece of fabric and staple it around wood and then dab the horse tail into the pigment and depict a forest, you know? And what he's saying is that's the advantage of a painter, you know? Can't get involved in the detail. And the painter is going to be able to depict a forest because of those kinds of things. It's great. It's just great. It's just great. And so I'm thinking about all these long exposures. How do you depict a city where you don't have the data? You know, and I do get locked into, we don't have an address and we don't have any addresses and how am I supposed to do this? You know, and we got to figure out a way. And it's all these lines. And the last one is Ann Rubin, and she knows what I'm going to say. It's really fresh. It's from about 3 months ago, and I am being a drama queen about data and addresses. And Ann has the ability to just say 4 or 5 words and just cut through all the chaff, and we move on. And so I'm just going off on how we're going to get the addresses, and she just says, embrace the fuzzy, Dan. And what I like about this one is that it's not a meme. You know, she put my name at the end of it. She just didn't say embrace the fuzzy. She said, Dan, this is your problem. You need to work this out, please. Okay? So anyway, thank you very much. I've enjoyed this. Research is an effort of a village, not an individual. And I've enjoyed this year, and I've enjoyed working with you all, and thank you very much. This would be the time when there's questions, and Anne is here. And if you actually have questions on the data, she'd be happy to answer it. And I know that there's classes in here, and you're all got deadlines and everything, so just leave quietly. I'll take no offense. Lee.
Well, I was going to say, you go ahead first. What extent were you planning on implementing interactivity with the people of early Baltimore? Or is it like the stories you guys think are attractive?
Two things. One is the question is.
To what extent is the interactivity going to be on people of early Baltimore?
Did you hear that? You want me to repeat it? Are the people in this vision that I just put out that's literally 3 days old, do we know whether the people are going to be interactive? No, we don't know. A couple of things is that the IRC is moving towards, we are moving towards moving this into a real-time engine, Unreal. So it will be in a video game kind of engine. It's not a small undertaking to get this much data in one scene into Unreal. I think, to answer your question, I think it gets really tricky in these kind of situations depicting people and interacting with them. For a couple of reasons. One, there's the uncanny valley, which I think everybody probably knows what that is. That the closer to realistic you get to a certain point and it just falls off and there's a repulsion that happens. But there's another story, and I'm going to butcher it, and Lee should jump in and correct me on this one. But there was a study with people wearing VR headsets and playing, they were told that they were going to be in a room with 2 or 3 other people wearing headsets, and they're going to just go play a game. And so they start off, and you're a sphere and they're a sphere, or a happy face. Just a really simple round head with 2 eyes and a mouth. And people had a blast playing the games. And they were really creative. And then they slowly started moving those depictions of people to more and more realistic. And the play changed. And it wasn't as playful, because people began to start looking at the yeah, thank you. And relating to it and to what it might possibly mean, and that changed how they play. So I think that, and Anna and I haven't talked about this at all, I'm just talking off the top of my head. I think personally that we're dealing with a really abstract level. So I don't want, and that's why I like the top-down view and just shadows possibly. But the interactivity, sure, wouldn't it be great if they're walking? Oh my God. Do you have $1 million? But I think the interactivity at most would be you'd click on them, which is also an aggressive act, but that's all I can say. All right, now Lee.
First of all, I just have to say thank you for this presentation, because it was just fabulous. I mean, from having been kind of close down, seeing it at this view is just beautiful. It's a looking down thing in a way, but it's really nice. But now I'm going to really drill in. I was thinking about the overlay of the dots, free blacks, enslaved white folks, and it is so incredibly non-segregated compared to obviously the HOLC map. But am I seeing more enslaved in the center city? Is that an indication of wealth? Any early thoughts about this? Because I know you guys have just been sort of looking at this.
Go for it.
More?
Go for it.
I think you are, and there's slight variations. I mean, all the wards are roughly 70 to 80% white, with differing percentages of free blacks and enslaved, but it makes sense that the areas with the most whites would also be the areas with the highest percentage of enslaved, whereas the areas with the higher percentages of free blacks would have a lower percentage of enslaved, because enslaved are presumably, not entirely, because Baltimore is unusual in many ways, one of which is that there's a high percentage of enslaved people living on their own, hiring at their own time. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's generally what would sort of accord with what we're seeing. You know, I have to look back at the data. I mean, it's census data that has the absolute numbers. But yeah, I mean, it seems to look like what the data says.
Thank you.
Sure.
Then, I'm a statistician, as you know, and I love ambiguity or uncertainty, as we call it. So when you said that you're not certain where to place somebody, that is probably going to happen to a lot of the people that you're talking about. And is it possible to kind of visualize it in a way, okay, that person could be anywhere here, so every click takes me to a different possible place. That way I can actually see what is the overall impact, because some of the macro variables will not be impacted at all by where they are located within a block or ward, for example.
I think those are all great points and suggestions. I am not a data visualization whiz, but I am really interested in figuring out ways to show fuzzy data, whether it's through tints of color. You know, do you just take a whole side of a street and begin to color it in that way? Or what am I hearing you say, that you could just randomly generate different ones and see which ones?
You could actually place them within an interval. And for example, within a I can put a circle,
Right.
Circle of uncertainty around each person.
Right, exactly, right. I think that's a great idea. We're going with him first. Go ahead.
Have you considered partnering with any other corporations, like a video game company or something, to work on interactivity with you? Or is this something that you wouldn't?
No, we consider it. and we would be positive about the consideration. We have tried a lot to get people interested. There's a lot of different approaches, and it's not interesting. Money's tight, but I would be concerned about what kind of story a video game company would want to generate. You know, I'd rather them just sell. UMBC sells them the data. We make a whole bunch of money and build a new building someplace, and they can use the data and do whatever they want. But no, there are some game companies that like to work with academia. You know, my dream is that wouldn't Google like to put this up there? But you know, all that takes that takes a huge amount of time and energy to make those connections and build it, and it gets complicated really quick. But those are good ideas. Lisa.
I was just going to say, what you were saying about the layering of the stats sounds extremely similar to what you were doing with the photography.
Yes. Yes. No. No. No, no, no. Yes, yes. No, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think you learn something by layering stuff. Go ahead.
I'm wondering about the sort of the ultimate intent of this, because you described
Which
it
is this?
as this project itself. I mean, not just this slide, this project of mapping early Baltimore, visualizing early Baltimore. So you described it as this tool, and there's this, you're going through all this deluge of data and parsing out what matters and what doesn't. So I'm wondering what conclusions are intended to be drawn by about what is included and what is excluded. Because that, including and excluding data sort of itself defines an intent of what is being measured by this mapping.
Right. I'm agreeing with you. I think what I want to make sure I'm clear, or we're clear on, is that there's sort of two things happening here with this. One is, and the project that Anne is bringing in, the content that she's bringing in is really helping us figure out what a researcher wants. What does a researcher need to be able to visualize the data that they need to visualize in early Baltimore? So there's the tool aspect of, well, we need the addresses. We don't have that, so there's 3 months. We need the wards. That takes 5 minutes. Some of it is really quick. And then what other data might they want to work with? So there's that aspect, and that's part of what I'm wanting to do, is to have a generic database that anybody can put anything. Then there's the content that Anne's doing, which is specific to free blacks and enslaved people in Baltimore. And I don't know if you want to answer that question or not.
I mean, I think where I'm coming from and why I'm interested in telling the stories of free blacks and enslaved people in Baltimore in the early 19th century is because Baltimore in some ways is a microcosm of the United States, and Baltimore is really unusual in that it has this large free black population. And it's also a way, I think, to recapture the lives of people who are not usually in works of history, right? Like when you study Baltimore history, you're mostly learning about, the Carrolls and the Ridgeleys, and this is actually, you're not learning about like the laundresses and the day laborers, and a lot of my work is influenced by the work of a historian named Seth Rockman, who about 10 years ago published a book called Scraping By, which is about the working class of Baltimore in this period, and who showed that you can actually do it. But that it's a way to also show that the Baltimore of today, which is so deeply segregated, to be most simplistic, right, is not the Baltimore of 200 years ago, right? That the Baltimore of 200 years ago had its own issues and its own problems and its own struggles. And some of those struggles are similar to the struggles of today, and some of them are different, but to show sort of every place has a history is part of it too.
Go ahead.
It seemed to me like you were asking this question, like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, if you were excluding any data, or like if you were trying to present something, it seemed to me like you were just collecting everything that you have access to, and you're presenting, you're not really making a commentary, you're just, it's something that people can interpret as they look at it, but you're not really saying on your own, like, this is what I think, right? Like, you're not excluding data to present some kind of story, you're not, like, you're taking everything that's available to you to use on this map.
I would say we're not to that point yet. I don't think we're making any conclusions at this point.
I mean, but you always include and exclude data. I mean, even the newspaper ads that Dan showed the slides of runaways and of the slave trade. I mean, those are not. That's sample data, right? I just read the first issue of every month of the newspaper for certain years. I didn't read it every day. So like, and I made judgments about who counts as a runaway slave in Baltimore, right? So that there's ads in the paper for like ran away from Prince George's County, and I didn't count that unless they said ran to Baltimore. Like, so that part of being a historian or an artist, right? You're always excluding and including. And so I think part of what Dan and I are trying to do as we think about the uncertainty and the fuzziness and how do you represent people sort of abstractly is to also, at the same time that we're trying to get as close as we can to a portrait of what Baltimore looked like 200 years ago, is to always bear in mind that it's not a picture. It's not it's a visualization. It's a representation. I didn't know about Lee's thing about the painter, but it's perfect. Because I think that's what we're trying to do, right? We're representing it, we're depicting it, we're not
Well, that's all we can do.
reconstructing. Yeah, it's all we can do. But I think that both of us are sensitive in our work to foregrounding that. That it's a depiction, not a, yeah, I don't know what the word would be.
Perminda.
So thank you so much, Dan. It was really amazing. What struck me most was your decision to, conflate time. You started off with geologic time, where we kind of just become swallowed into this immensity of the universe in some ways, and then you go into this nitty-gritty kind of time where there's all of the conflicts, and then what is real and what is true, and did this really happen, and who was there, and all of those things is what we're always caught up in. And then, but I was thinking, as talking as a painter, you're an artist, and so what attracts you to this sort of this vast sense of time?
Wow. Talk to Kathy. She knows what I'm. I just want to be by myself. No, I think there really is an attraction to me to be in the outdoors world. And if you think about the process that I'm doing here, and I may not have said it, but slow exposure, one of the reasons I like the word slow is that it's my process too. David Hockney has some great quotes about the difference between photography and painting. And one of them is about how a painter will look at something over a period of a month and starts blending that all together, whereas a photographer goes, maybe waits 3 hours to get the light just right and clicks a picture and moves on. And both ways are fine, but I'm really interested in this, in sort of the painterly way. But if you think about this process, that I have these, I call it almost farming. I have these camera stations. I got to go out every day and take care of them. And, I get to a camera station, I put the camera up, and I'm there for 20 minutes. And so there is, a chance to think about what Lee said and think about what Kathy said and just look at whatever or complain about the ravens, I don't know. But there's a chance to meditate and sort of really be a part of that. And so I am attracted to that. And a good question that I'm asking myself is, do I want to do this technique in urban areas? And there's a lot of technical challenges to that, but there's some interest in that as well. But I think the trip I took out west to sort of reconnoiter, and it wasn't a slam dunk, as I said, I was thinking ghost towns, and I was thinking sort of ancient cultures that already had moved on and left some artifacts. That maybe that's a good place to start in terms of how you would look at depicting, to use Lee's word, depicting a city over 200 years. Kathleen.
Yeah, I'm thinking about your camera stations and all these cameras everywhere. And
It's just one camera.
well, but
Right.
at different points in time, and the locations where they are when you place them. Okay, and so how much of the placement? I'm trying to figure out how you make your decision on where to place it and what might limit that and how much that might affect your vision and your goals.
No, that might be the deep flaw to this whole process, that I'm trying to look at landscapes sort of beyond the human vision, but damn it, I'm a human and I'm out there positioning the camera. And I'm not interested in machine vision. I'm not interested in randomly picking dots and, okay, the GPS, I need to go here and I'll set it there and I'll do this and I'll run them through Photoshop and whatever I get. I mean, intellectually that's really easy, I think, but I'm not interested in that. So I do spend a lot of time trying to figure out what is going to look good at night and what's going to look good in day and what might look good with the wind blowing and clouds and things that move, and how am I going to make a forest where there's no forest now. And so there's a lot of decisions. I think that's one reason I'm really interested in the mundane landscape. You know, let's just go to a cornfield and let's document a cornfield for 2 or 3 years and work the other way, because usually we're very tempted to pick dramatic shots. Rebecca, go ahead.
Thank you so much. This was really, really inspiring presentation. It's no mean feat to keep people wrapped, for over an hour at the end of the semester. You did it. I wanted to talk actually about the first project, the Slow Exposure project, and I think that I would love to hear you talk about the relationship between what you called anthropocentric landscape and how you see that, the kind of work you see those images doing in a moment when so much of the discourse about the environment is about anthropogenic climate change, right? Or living,
right.
And living in a world, that humans are sort of destroying. And I was thinking too about the possibility of these two time scales, right? That if you had a sufficiently long exposure, but maybe it wouldn't even be that long, that these two time scales of the geologic of how the world is formed and the human might actually begin to converge if you were sort of capturing the effects of things like climate change. So I just love to hear you talk about
I would love to hear me talk about that too. That's a great question. I think about it all. I mean, on my bleakest moments, I start thinking about, okay, I'm a white male, white privilege. I just want to get away from it all. I'm just going to go out there and erase all humans and live on a beautiful hilltop and think about thousands of years, and those are bleak moments. And I do question myself as to what's going on here. I think it goes back to Kathleen's question, and that I do need to work through some stuff, and I know who you are, and if you had some stuff that you thought I should read, I would die to get a reading list from you. I really would. That would be great. And then maybe we could have a longer conversation. How about one more? Is that okay?
One more, sure.
Kathy, you're closing the house down.
I was hesitant to ask a question because when you give your talk again in 10 years, you're going to quit. But it was great, Dan. It was really great. But I'm so glad that you just mentioned the word bleak, because it kept, peeking in from the corners of your frames every so often for me, which is remarkable because I always think of you as such an optimist in your everyday life. But there's something, and I think I'm fascinated by this because it somehow connects to what I'm working on with my history of the dot. There's something about those vast landscapes, and even this big, picture that makes me mindful of the fact I'm just a dot.
Yep.
I'm just one of those dots, right? And that can flip really quickly into bleakness. But it can also flip back and be unbelievably breathtakingly cosmic. It's like Carl Sagan's pale blue dot. When they said to the Apollo 1, take one last picture, and it did. And it took the picture of the Earth, and it was the pale blue dot, right? And it's like, there's something unbelievably soul-crushing about that, because that means we're like a mass of nothingness. No, it would be oxymoronic. But it can also just be so freeing. So anyway, that's just a lot of blah, but.
No, again, you all are asking the right questions. I think that I love this term hope, hubris, and grief. I think I was having a drink with Lee a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about some oceanographers, and they just said, the ocean's done. We need to move past the fixing stage and move into the grief stage. And so there is that idea that, the anthropocentric time period to start expressing it, to start looking at it and putting it into a time scale. That's all. That's really all I can say at this point. I thought I had one more glimmer of hope there, but maybe the reception and some food will help get that glimmer. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Thank you so much, Dan, for this and for everything that you do for so many of us and have done for so long. This has been our last Humanities Forum lecture for this semester, so please keep your eyes on the Drescher Center website for announcements about next fall's Humanities Forum series. It should be out there before too long. It's also my pleasure to announce that next year's Lipitz Professor in the Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences will be Dr. Jessica Berman, Professor long introduction next year. Jessica Berman is an internationally renowned scholar in the field of modernism, and she's been instrumental in expanding that field's focus to include modernist movements in the global South. She joined UMBC in 1995 and served 6 years as chair of the English department. Many of us know her as the director of the Drescher Center for the Humanities, in which role she has fostered the work and the careers and the interactions of so many of us through the many programs that she has developed in her five plus years as director of the Drescher Center. She's also the author of 4 books and 22 journal articles and chapters. She's the co-PI on our grant with the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, The Inclusion Imperative, Expanding Diversity in the Humanities. And during her year as the Lipitz Professor, Dr. Berman will work on her book project entitled Media Relations, Modernism and Global Radio. More next year when I introduce you, but I just want to say for right now that I'm thrilled that Jessica Berman will be next year's Lipitz Professor in the Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, recognizing your contributions in every area of endeavor here at UMBC and far beyond. I want to thank you all for being here today. We have a reception out there, so come, enjoy, ask Dan more questions, but let him get something to eat and drink.